Archaeologists thought they knew the rules. Then they tested the DNA. 10 burials changed everything. For centuries, archaeologists assigned identity based on grave goods. Swords meant warriors meant men. Jewelry meant women. Bronze meant elite. These were the rules. The rules were never tested. They were assumed. For over 100 years, male or female, warrior or domestic, elite or common, binary categories imposed on complex lives. Every skeleton is a decision point. The archaeologist assigns identity before the lab confirms it. Then ancient DNA arrived, and burial after burial turned out to be something nobody expected. A drill, a tube, and a sequencing machine. The toolkit that overturned a century of assumptions. Here are 10 burials that broke every rule scientists thought they knew. Each burial a puzzle, each DNA result a revelation. The dead have been speaking. We were just not listening. Behind this door, a century of assumptions is being systematically dismantled. One bone at a time. Here are 10 burials that broke every rule scientists thought they knew. Burial number 1. The Viking warrior woman of Birka. Burial BJ 581 at Birka, Sweden. Excavated in 1878. A warrior buried with sword, axe, spear, 2 shields, arrows, and 2 horses. For over a century, everyone assumed the warrior was male. Nobody tested it. In 2017, DNA confirmed the skeleton was female. The most famous Viking warrior burial belonged to a woman. Birka was one of the most important Viking trading ports. The warrior woman was buried at its heart. The announcement split the archaeological community. Some celebrated, others pushed back hard. The debate continues, but the DNA does not change. The skeleton is female, a woman buried with more weapons than most male Vikings. The assumption had been wrong for a century. The original excavator wrote male without question. The weapons decided nobody checked for 139 years. A woman buried with more weapons than most male Vikings. The assumption had been wrong for a century. Some researchers argued the weapons were ceremonial, but 2 war horses and a gaming board suggest a military commander, not a symbolic burial. Burial number 2. The Gold Man of Varna. Varna, Bulgaria, 6,500 years old. The oldest gold treasure ever found. Over 1.5 kilograms of gold buried with a single individual. More gold than the rest of the cemetery combined. Gold bracelets, gold rings, a gold-sheathed scepter, the material statement of absolute power, 6,500 years old. And the gold still gleams. The power it represented is long gone. The graves around him contained almost nothing. The inequality was absolute even in death. One person owned everything. The rest owned nothing. Social hierarchy recorded in gold. 6,500 years ago, this coast held the richest civilization in Europe. Now we know the richest burial in the world predates the pyramids by 2,000 years. And nobody knows who he was. His Y chromosome haplogroup is T, a lineage now extremely rare in modern Europe. He represents a population that was almost completely replaced within 5 centuries. The wealthiest man in Copper Age Europe belonged to a genetic lineage that would be wiped out within centuries by the Yamnaya steppe migration. His DNA predicts dark skin and dark eyes. The wealthiest person in Copper Age Europe looked nothing like modern Bulgarians. Dark skin, dark eyes draped in gold. The face that ruled Copper Age Europe, the richest grave in prehistoric Europe. And his entire genetic lineage was erased within 5 centuries. Burial number 3. The triple burial of Sungur. Sungur, Russia, 34,000 years old. 3 people buried with over 13,000 mammoth ivory beads. Each bead took roughly an hour to carve. The total labor investment was over 10,000 hours of work. 1 bead, 1 hour, 13,000 beads. 5 years of continuous labor. The beaded clothing alone would have taken years to make for children who were not even family. The rule of this broke. The 2 adolescents were not the adults' children. Head to head, The adolescents faced opposite directions. A ritual arrangement, not a family grave. The arrangement was deliberate, planned, the bodies positioned with precision. A straightened mammoth tusk, 2 meters long, the most sophisticated weapon of the Upper Paleolithic. 34,000 years ago, someone invested 10,000 hours in the ceremonial interment of youth who were not their own. DNA showed the adult and the 2 children were not closely related, not parent and child, not siblings. The burial was social, not genetic. Burial number 4. The incest burial at Newgrange. Newgrange, Ireland, 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids. Built by a society with a dark secret. DNA from an adult male buried in the most sacred chamber of Newgrange showed his parents were first-degree relatives, brother and sister, or parent and child. The man buried in the holiest spot in Neolithic Ireland was the product of incest. Deliberate, elite incest. The innermost chamber, the spot where the solstice light falls, reserved for the most important person. Every stone carved, every beam placed, for the burial of a man whose parents were siblings. The pattern mirrors Egyptian pharaonic practice. A ruling class that maintained power through endogamy so extreme it crossed into incest. 5,000 years ago, in Ireland, an elite that bred like pharaohs, Hawaii, Peru, Egypt, Ireland, separated by oceans, connected by the same genetic strategy of power. The sun enters Newgrange once a year. It illuminates the remains of a man whose parents were siblings. Elite incest was not a local aberration. It was a universal strategy of concentrated power. Burial number 5. The impossible child of Denisova Cave. A single bone fragment, smaller than a coin, from a teenage girl who lived roughly 90,000 years ago. This fragment, smaller than a thumbnail, contained the secret of 2 species meeting, the most important bone in human evolution. Smaller than a postage stamp, her DNA showed something that had never been seen before in any ancient genome. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. She was a first-generation hybrid, 50% Neanderthal, 50% Denisovan, not a distant mixture. A direct cross. Every chromosome showed the split. Neanderthal on one copy, Denisovan on the other, a textbook first-generation hybrid. When the results were announced, the room went silent. Nobody had expected a direct hybrid. The cave had already yielded DNA from Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans. All 3 species used the same cave, sometimes at the same time. The rule this broke, species were supposed to be reproductively isolated. Denisova 11 proved they were not. The human family tree is not a tree. It is a braided river. Species diverging and reconverging. Every textbook diagram of human evolution is wrong. Denisova 11 proved it. The march of progress is a myth. Human evolution was a tangled web of interbreeding. The odds of finding a first-generation hybrid in the fossil record are astronomically low, unless hybridization was common. Burial number 6. The mass burial at Cahokia. Cahokia, Illinois, America's largest ancient city. Mound 72 contained over 270 burials. For decades, the mass burial was interpreted as a sacrifice of young women. Over 50 bodies in one pit. The 1960s interpretation assumed female sacrifice. Nobody questioned it for 40 years. The original field notes show how quickly assumptions were made and how long they lasted. Then reanalysis showed the original sex determinations were wrong. Many of the supposed women were men. Older methods relied on pelvic shape alone. Modern methods use multiple skeletal indicators plus DNA. Old method, 1 bone, 1 guess. New method, multiple bones plus genetic confirmation. The mass sacrifice of women became a mass sacrifice of mixed sex. The entire interpretation collapsed. Burial number 7. The 2 bodies embracing at Pompeii. 2 figures found locked in an embrace. For decades, they were called the 2 maidens or the 2 sisters, frozen in time by volcanic ash. The embrace preserved for 2,000 years. The ash hardened in minutes. The bodies decomposed inside. The voids became plaster molds. DNA analysis revealed one was male. The embrace was between a man and a woman, or possibly two men. The two sisters of Pompeii were not two sisters. Burial number 8. The woman who ruled Bronze Age Spain, Ley Almoloya, Spain, 3,700 years old. A woman buried with a silver crown and the richest grave goods in El Argar civilization. She was buried under the governing hall of the settlement, the seat of political power. The richest burial in El Argar civilization was a woman buried under the throne room. Isotope analysis showed she grew up somewhere else. She was brought to Ley Almoloya, possibly through a political marriage that gave her authority. Buried directly under the seat of power, not beside it, under it. The architecture of authority. The architecture made the statement, whoever ruled this hall was buried beneath it. The El Argar civilization controlled southeastern Spain for 5 centuries. A woman was buried at its political heart. Burial number 9. The Crusader Pit of Sidon, Lebanon, a mass grave from the 13th century. Crusader warriors thrown into a ditch after a battle. DNA revealed 3 types of people in the same pit: Europeans, Near Easterners, and first-generation hybrids with mixed ancestry, all fighting on the same side. Sword cuts, arrow wounds, blunt force trauma. They died together regardless of ancestry. One sword wielded by a warrior whose parents came from 2 different continents. The Crusades were not Europeans against locals. The DNA shows both sides were already mixed. Europeans, locals, and their children, all fighting in the same army, all dying in the same ditch. Within 2 generations of the First Crusade, the genetic boundaries had already blurred. 2 generations. That is all it took for the genetic boundaries between conqueror and conquered to disappear. The Crusades were not Europeans against locals. The DNA shows both sides were already mixed. Burial number 10. The Lovers of Modena. 2 skeletons found holding hands in a 5th century cemetery in Modena, Italy. Immediately assumed to be a man and a woman. DNA analysis in 2019 revealed both skeletons were male. The museum label said maidens. The DNA said males. The label was changed. The label changed. The assumption behind it changed slower. The Lovers of Modena were 2 men, buried holding hands in 5th century Italy. Whether they were lovers, brothers, or comrades in arms remains unknown. The DNA answered the sex question, but not the relationship question. 3 hypotheses, all plausible. DNA can determine sex. It cannot determine love. The hands are still clasped. Whatever the relationship was, it was chosen. In the final moment, the rule this broke, the assumption that hand-holding meant romantic heterosexual love. The DNA said otherwise. 10 burials. 10 assumptions destroyed. And 1 lesson. The grave goods tell you what the community believed about the person. The DNA tells you who the person actually was. 1 bone sample, 1 extraction, 1 sequence, and a century of assumptions overturned. The technology now exists to test every burial ever excavated. The only limit is funding. Each genome costs roughly $500 to sequence. Millions of burials await. The math is simple. 10 burials, 10 wrong assumptions. The error rate should concern every archaeologist alive. And the 2 stories often do not match. Gender assumptions, kinship assumptions, status assumptions, species assumptions, all broken by DNA. The next rule-breaking burial is already in a museum drawer somewhere, waiting to be tested. Every grave is a story someone told about the dead. DNA is the dead telling their own story. How many other burials are mislabeled? How many warriors are women? How many families are strangers? Millions of burials. Fewer than 1% tested for DNA. The rule breaking has barely begun. Less than 1% tested, more than 99% still carrying their secrets. Every drawer is a potential headline. Every bone a potential revolution. The museum closes. The bones wait. Somewhere in those drawers, the 11th rule-breaking burial is sleeping. Tell me in the comments which burial surprised you the most. Sources in the description. Subscribe for more.